We typically go around and raise our hands and say what companies are here who represent promoters. So I think we can do that pretty quickly. I'm a promoter for Intel. Paul?
Craig, promoter for Craig.
Matt?
Matt Langer,
Bill?
promoter for Moana. Father Shep, promoter for
Our newest.
Bill Weber, promoter for
Good. Yep. We got Knox through Bill.
Yes, I'm sorry. David Creek, promoter.
I'm sorry? Oracle. Yes, David. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone we've missed? Okay. The reason we do this every year, first we're required to because of our bylaws, but it's a good idea anyway. We want to provide some exposure to what we're doing within Open Fabrics. We believe in transparency as an organization. This is a way to actually demonstrate it. We're trying to go beyond what's covered in our monthly board meetings and certainly obviously beyond what's talked about in the workshop itself. So there's going to be some inevitable overlap. We're going to do our best to make no more of it than necessary. We also want to point out the fact that there is benefit in membership in Open Fabrics, but it's not a requirement to participate in a meaningful way with Open Fabrics activities. For example, I think Paul's already told you, he may repeat it one way or another, the OFIWG has tremendous participation every week. Something in the order of 25 to 35 people participate. A large number are not members of Open Fabrics, and that's absolutely fine. As non-members, they can't vote, and they can't actually lead the working group, but their contributions are incredibly important. I mean, Jeff Squires is a stand-up example of someone who gives us tremendous amount of input from his MPI point of view and experience.
You went around only the promoters, all members are in this meeting.
Okay.
So we join at the flag public.
Okay. Thank you. Who else is a member of Open Fabrics not at the promoter level? Do you want to just quickly say your names?
System fabric works.
Great, thanks. I'm sorry for that. Thank you. This is my own summary of what I think of as being the OFA priorities. This is, kind of just my view on it, but I had a chance to run this by others to make sure I wasn't totally off base. I think you're seeing from the share coverage in today's meetings of OFIWIG, this is clearly a priority of ours. It's been, again, highly successful and highly productive. What's happened very recently is the OFVWG, the Open Fabrics Verbs Working Group. We're actually going to have one slide each from the leaders of each of these two working groups. OFEWG, because it is new, has less of a track record, but give them credit, they've only just started. We also are strongly supportive of the Interop logo program. I think it's a foundational element for Open Fabrics. Bill Boas has recently implemented a number of changes in how the dues are collected for this. The way this works is we charge participation fees in the Interop program on a strictly cost recovery basis. So if for any reason there's a hiccup in Open Fabrics being paid, that money doesn't come into Open Fabrics, but it's still owed to UNHIOL, so we have to make up the difference, and that can be painful. We aren't sure, but we think we may be embarking on another round of work with the distros to improve our practices and procedures. We did this, I want to say, 3 or 4 years ago, and it resulted in a really remarkable improvement in how we worked with the distros. I think it's fair to say that the work is not entirely done. Certainly it's not done once and forever. I'm not convinced yet there is more work to do, but I guess I want to make sure you all understand how much we rely on the distros and how important it is to us to make sure that we're working as closely and cooperatively with them as we possibly can. So this is not, sort of committed at the moment, but it is a really interesting idea for us to keep in mind and see if something does emerge. We're also very interested in continuing to provide what we call sysadmin support. We offer training to a certain extent. We offer the user group program, as you know, the two days that follow the developers workshop. We have developed training. This has turned out to be a bit of a disappointment in that there hasn't been as much uptake of verbs training as we had hoped for. I'm not sure if anyone understands why. Did we somehow miss the boat? But it is something that we thought was important, we invested in from an open fabric standpoint, but it really hasn't amounted to very much. The segue at this point is to some slides specifically on the two key working groups we want to talk about. I also want to talk about what Bill Lee's been doing and leading some work on the website, which is going to change the look and feel and its ability to support our member constituencies significantly. And I want to make sure that Bill has a chance to stand up and sort of read into the minutes our current financial environment. So before we go on to those new topics, any questions or comments on what I've covered so far as being some of the Open Fabric's priorities and areas of interest? Okay, hearing none. Bill, do you mind?
Okay, so I'll give you the profit and loss for last year, 2014. We had a total income of $284,000. We spent $174,000 and we put some money in the bank for future reserves and things. That amount was not as much as the balance the P&L showed because in January had to make up some of the shortage for the interoperability lab at UNH. Which is what caused me to do what Jim referenced. As of right now, if I can get the right spreadsheet. As of right now, we have approximately $148,000 in the bank in various accounts, and we're in the process of collecting dues for membership. We're owed $81,000. If any of you know whether your company has or has not paid, please check into that and let us collect the dues that we're owed. We haven't got any collection done for the dues for the interoperability program, but we have effectively agreed with UNH that we're going to hold an interoperability test. And that means that we're going to owe them approximately $70,000. We pay them twice a year for interoperability, and a total of $140,000. So we're not quite as financially strong as it sounds if you just look at the current bank balances. We run on a cash basis, so any day you can see exactly where we stand, but we don't, for example, accrue the $70,000 we know we're going to owe UNH by May, right? So that's probably enough. If anybody wants to know any more detail, I have the accounting detail here. You can talk to me offline.
And we also load the financials every month onto our system of record, Causeway.
All the reports that I quoted numbers out of are on Causeway. If you have access to Causeway, you're welcome to look at them there. And any member has access to Causeway. You just have to log on and create your ID and password, and then you can see everything's on there.
Great, thank you. So we have 3 topics coming. The next one up is OFWIG, which Paul's going to speak on, and then OFEWG, which Galad's going to speak on. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a report from Bill on what's happening with the website. Bill, Paul, do you want to use the bully pulpit or talk from there?
I'd rather talk from here, but I'm going to use the bully pulpit because I'm so tired of it work. So I'm going to do that. I'm hoping with the results of the sessions today that we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this slide. It is something that's new. We haven't done it in the past, and I would like at the end, that last bullet, are we being clear? Do you agree with this direction? Some kind of feedback from the promoters and members. Are we doing the right thing in terms of shifting the OFA towards a development organization and away from an enabling organization? One other comment I wanted to make is with respect to OFI, Actually, I'm going to spend most of my time, with Laurent's permission, talking about OFV, ironically. Um, You're getting an unbalanced picture here because we spent all morning up until lunch talking about OFI, and we're not going to do that corresponding thing for OFV until tomorrow. So you're probably all sitting there with OFI in the brain, but I don't want you to forget the value and importance of the work that's emerging in the working group that Laurent and Pavel are leading called OFV. I do want to emphasize that second bullet as much as I can. You know, this is not the OFA walking away from its traditional responsibility towards verbs or as being an implementer of APIs to run over IB, Rocky, or IWARP. We are adding, exactly as the slide says, a new form of innovation. And the significant difference is, again, we hammered on this earlier, so I don't want to belabor the point, but the difference is it is not tied to an underlying industry specification as verbs are today. So in some sense, we're a little bit out there without a net, which is a good thing. The whole notion behind OFI, there were really, at least from my perspective, two motivating factors. One was there was a large community that we were not serving well, and that was MPI. And you heard that in spades from Jeff and others today. And the feeling was, right, wrong, or indifferent, there's as many opinions about this as there are people on the earth. The feeling was that it was not could not be well managed in an API that was tied closely to the semantics of InfiniBand transport, which is the reason why we spun up a new effort, which ultimately resulted in an agreement to do a new API. The other is the scalability question. There was some feeling that fundamentally we would not be able to achieve the kind of scaling that we needed with an API, again, that's tied as closely as verbs are to the InfiniBand architecture. Again, I want to emphasize the point that this is not, as Gilad said, and I thought he said it very eloquently, this is not an either-or thing. This is not a winner or the loser. It's just the OFA responding to the needs of its members to provide the sorts of APIs that are needed for networking going forward. So me personally, I'm a giant supporter of the whole concept of OFV. There's only so many hours in a day, so I don't have time to work on it. But, I believe in the whole idea. And the reason is because I believe that, I don't want to say that the IBTA has been sleepy or not addressing issues, but there are things that could and should be done and were not being done. And as Bill Magro challenged us, I forget if it was last year or the year before, the question he raised was, what if the software leads? And I think this is a really great example of that. This is the OFA leading in terms of developing the verbs API going forward. So we are traditionally, beyond, as it says in the slide, intentionally beyond where we were with verbs, but not at the expense of RDMA. The other thing I want to talk about, we are not and have not, and as far as I know, there are no plans to ever become a standards body for lots of reasons that are probably not worth reviewing here. The decision was made in the OFI a couple of years ago at the time that we adopted IWARP as a new transport, a new wire, let me put it that way, that the OFA would not transition itself into becoming a standards organization itself. It is and always will be, my personal opinion, an implementation body that implements standards. That begs the question of what about OFI? There's no underlying standard. What we've agreed to do, the way we're managing that, is the OFI API will be well documented, and that documentation will take two forms. One is a complete set of man pages. So we have a release criteria that we're working on before we go through a release. The release criteria include the code be complete, there be at least one provider to support it, it be tested, and it be well documented. The question of what well documented means remains to be seen, since we are an open source community and people could change their minds about how much needs to be in the man pages. But there is strong agreement within OFI-WIG that if you're contributing code, you have an obligation to contribute the man page, probably before you even contribute the code. That's part of the tarball, and so therefore it automatically progresses with releases of the API as it should. The other document that I think we're coming to agreement on that we're going to need has been described as the Zen document, which is something that describes, at sort of a conceptual level, sort of a white paper descriptive form, includes, charts and drawings and figures, and 8.5 by 10 colors with a paragraph in the back of each one. What OFI is and how it works. And we're looking now for a publication organization and writers to create such a document that will also be part of the release. What those things say is that we have agreed that the API will be well documented. It will not be an industry standard. At least there's no plan for it to be now.
It's kind of like how that works. I mean,
Funny thing about that, yeah, other people have drawn that same analogy.
the one rule that they have is if you change one line of code, you have to change every other line of code from the entire 10 million that depends on that line of code. So you can't just patch that breaks the whole.
You can't just hide something.
No, you can't. If you change one component, then you break the not the distribution of the thing, then that's another.
Well, that seems like a reasonable approach for us to be taking as well. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Well, can you talk about testing?
In what context?
The code that's being submitted is tested like any other contribution.
It is. There is, and I'm going to be truthful here. Testing is never what you want it to be. It's never as much as you want it to be. But we are an open source organization. You've got to rely on the good faith nature of the people who are contributing this. The agreement is amongst the group, and it's a very strong agreement, that it needs to be tested. Push comes to shove, will it be perfectly, completely, fully, absolutely, completely tested to a validation engineer's satisfaction before release? Probably not. But ideally it will be at a level of testing that we feel comfortable that what we're releasing really is something we can stand behind and feel comfortable about. Is that where you're going with this, or did you want to get to the
The idea is not to break OFA, to put it simply.
Right.
Bob's point.
We would not, exactly. We will not stick something, I'm going to stand up here and say this, and someone can shoot me later. We will not stick something in OFED as a package that doesn't work, that's seriously broken. Now, again, we're just getting this thing off the ground right now, so it includes, the first release is expected to include a number of providers. There's intended to be the question, of course, is going to be how complete each of these are, but there's going to be a sockets provider, a PSM provider, a US NIC provider, and a verbs provider, and there are other providers in the works that I'm aware of, but haven't been announced publicly, that will be released over time. The question becomes how thoroughly tested any one of those providers is. Some will be better than others. And to be honest, I think we're going to beg a little bit of forbearance. The first release will not be perfect. No one ever expects it to be. But I think we expect that, a quarter or maybe 2 quarters, worst case later, it's pretty solid. But by the other hand, we did not want to wait a lot longer to put things out in the public domain for people to begin working with, because we're an open source community and we thrive on that feedback. So we're walking sort of a knife edge between how complete and how thoroughly tested versus really wanting to get a broader engagement in the community. So that's one of the things that's driving the release schedule. Arnold.
With respect to RFPs, how will organizations say they want OFA? It's just mandates.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if I want to specify in my RFP that vendors should support OFA,
I have no idea how to do that.
but
I don't have an
it'd be a problem we run into later.
I don't have an answer to that question.
It's not, I'll speak from that. It's very easy to put in an RFP, the open fabrics line.
You know what? I was thinking RFC when you said that. It's been a long day for me. But sure, in the same way that an RFP today can say it must support OFA, OFED, or verbs.
But there's a spec in the standard for that.
There is a spec, but that spec is not tied to the API in any actual way. It's a logical connection, not a physical one. There is no connection, in theory, between IB specification of verbs in the IB spec and what's produced as a verbs API, and there won't be here either. What an RFP says, is generally you will supply it with verbs. I'm paraphrasing. I don't see why we wouldn't do the same thing for OFI WIG. Maybe I'm wrong. Somebody who writes RFPs, correct me if I'm wrong.
Usually the state, we run fabrics and we're using the open fabrics to they're going to pay money. What we're using
Yeah.
somewhat are going to support
Does that work?
I couldn't hear him.
What he said is, we don't care.
That's what I heard, yeah.
The only thing I think you want to know, open fabrics or use OFA, the OFA what, X.Y. We're supposed to have a requirement for the fabrics, we say open fabrics for 1.0 or
I'm hoping you wouldn't put LibFabrics 1.0 in a current RFP, but
assuming 1.0 with the potential stable release.
there you go.
Use on fashion.
Just to set the context, we are very close to our, what we are pointing at for 1.0. And by the way, what OFA WIG has done is it has adopted a time-based release schedule as opposed to a function-based release schedule. So we've agreed we'll do releases every 3 months, and there's a fairly well-defined release candidate process at the beginning of the cycle, which will begin on April 1st, April Fool's Day, I guess. We'll start with an alpha candidate for whatever will be the release after 1.0. And then that goes on for a month, and then there's 2 months worth of release candidates where we go through the normal kind of validation cycles before the release actually comes. So the first release is whatever it's called, and we're going to be discussing that at 7 o'clock in the next room if you're interested, will be the end of March 31st this year, going out coincident with OFED 3.18. We don't believe that that's going to be something that a for-profit commercial enterprise would want to take and package up and sell to its customers, but we sure hope that people will start spinning up things like, advanced development teams and so on to begin developing, knowing that this API is coming along. Any other comments about that? Stan?
Question about the future training of
Go ahead. That's a really good question, and to be honest, you've caught me flat-footed, which is kind of embarrassing because it's an important topic to me. It's always on my personal radar. I'm going to put that on the bin list of things that we need to discuss and figure out. There's sort of the broader training question to which Jim alluded earlier. The OFI has tried in the past to, and is still now, conducting or sponsoring, or what's the word I'm looking for? There is programming for RDMA. There's an RDMA fabric administration course, which isn't going anywhere at the moment. We should look at what do we do in terms of training. All of that being said, the position we don't want to be in is one where we come out with a new API, we toss it over the fence, and people go, I can't figure out how to use this damn thing, which is where the notion of this, what I described as a Zen document, comes from. That gives people sort of a way to get started in a practical way. But it's something we haven't grappled with. We should, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Guilty. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you see the difference between not being standards bodies, providing a base system over?
You're struggling with why we're not a standards body?
How do you think it's not defining standards?
Jason, that's a really long discussion that we've had a lot of times. It's a good question. It does have good answers. They're not short. In a nutshell, there's a lot of infrastructure that goes along with being a standards organization, and the OFA is not constituted at the moment to do this sort of thing that's required. It's pretty hard, but not impossible. Someone can give me a counterexample, I'm certain, of a standard that's owned and driven by an open standards organization, an open source.
You're talking I would say a technical sense of what a industry standard is.
Absolutely technical sense.
An IDTA kind of organization, less than a practical sense where you're defining standards, heterogeneous system called library signatures, you're expecting a lot of people to adopt.
So I'll be pedantic here. We're providing documentation that contains all the things that you said.
And code.
And code. So, you might claim it's semantic dithering, and maybe it is. But the problem is if we're not careful with the semantics and we're not careful about what we say we're doing, we wind up down a slippery slope in a place that the OFA, for whatever reason, and this was a discussion that went on a few years ago, could change, but for now, the OFA decided it did not want to do. it wanted to be an open source organization that creates APIs. I personally don't have the stomach for, driving a standards organization. That's a lot of work. I'm doing that in the IBTA. A lot of us are. It's a lot of work. I'm not sure it's something that we need to or want to be doing in this organization here. So I hate to give you a sort of a non-answer, but.
Well, but at the same time, the point is that Open Fabrics as an organization is set up to manage software development, code contribution, testing, release processes, that sort of thing. So our IP foundation is based on that. We are specifically not a standards organization that would require a different IP foundation. So we've been extremely careful to draw a line in the sand for OFIWIG that stays on the side of documentation and code and stays completely out of the area of standards. We make this information available to standards groups. They do with it what they want, but it really is not our focus. We were truly focused just on the code and supporting documentation. Glad?
A couple of points if I can. So first of all, the segmentation itself, if it's not a part of it, you can have open source, no open source, it's not part of the source. It's all part of the segmentation, but IBTA does define how to couple questions, couple comments here. One of the things, and I think we discussed it before, when we established the OFA working, is that we don't see a competition between Wi-Fi and OFA.
That's the point I'm trying to emphasize over and over again, and you are too.
I'm trying to.
Yep.
There is the verbs interface, and it is verbs solution.
Right.
And OFA is creating an abstraction there that sits on top of verbs and sits on top of anything else, right? And everyone can choose which one works better for them according to the performance level. So you can take API, you don't need to abstraction there if you want. There is nothing particular that prevents open fabrics in the future to develop other APIs or other fields.
That is exactly right.
So, now in the morning sessions, I built a completely different field. Now, if we do more sessions where we 100% OFE, there will be nothing that's going to talk about it compared to Wi-Fi. Because it's not comparative, it's completely something else. But during this morning, there was a completely different set of dialogue. And I think, the leaders or promoters of open topics, we should probably do better in providing the information out there and providing the standard.
Yeah, that's fair. As a representative of the OFA, I think I was very clear in my session this morning about the OFA's position about OFI and OFE and the relationship, and it's very much what you described. You and I are totally harmonious there. The sessions that you heard, to which I think you're referring, were all sessions provided by members who were providing their point of view. Was it a little bit harsh about, maybe, but it went a long way, I think, towards describing, well, why are we doing another API? The people had good and just reasons for it. Maybe it did come off a little harsh, I'm not sure, but. Yeah.
And that's brings us to the second point. I think when we're talking about API, we should bring other folks that work in API. Just Myers talking about open API from a Cisco perspective does not provide a full picture of the entire open API.
No, you're never going to get the entire,
There's other organizations that develop APIs.
Sure, but keep in mind, we also had Argonne who talked about MPitch. There haven't been any others, but those are two pretty big ones right there. And you're right, Jeff doesn't represent all of MPI, but he's a pretty good proxy. Let me refer to the requirements gathering activity that he described that we went through in OFIWIG. Jeff actually had literally 2 months worth of meetings in Open MPI to collect requirements, and those requirements came from a very broad list of people. I don't have the list with me, but it was broad. And then he brought those into OFIWIG, and we spent literally 6 weeks. There were 6 meetings in a row going through those. So your point is well taken, but on the other hand, I'm going to say that we're about as close to a decent representation from MPI as we could get.
Yeah, only comment is I think we can bring more folks. I think there is, for example, there is a huge work on
In what?
media, which
Wasn't addressed, that's right. I guess my take on it would be, we're open source, and the more people who come, the merrier. Yeah. I'd like to bring more people in because we're going to get a broader, a broader input. Joining the mailing list it's pretty easy to do. So I'm encouraging people to do that, get part of it.
We need to wrap this.
Okay. I just wanted to make, excuse me, for my purposes, one more point, and maybe get some feedback. But this whole idea about we're an input-driven organization, being driven less from the bottom up and more from the top down. And I would like some feedback from people if that's the right direction. It seems like my perception is we got some pretty good feedback from the labs today that said, yeah, this is a good thing that you're trying to do. And I think I'm hearing the same sort of feedback from other consumers of OFS. So if there's a way we could get that feedback, that would be good. Okay, thanks. I thought I was going to be here for just a minute or two, but it looks like it took longer than I thought.
Are you doing the, okay. Next up, we have a single slide on the OFEWG from one of the co-chairs.
Thank you. Okay. So first of all, let me compliment Paul with initial remarks on OFI. So first of all, OFI is doing a good job in providing an abstract API. I can understand that it might suit some other hardware that might not fit into the current Open Fabric stack. But the inherent point is that there is no technological issue or fundamental technological issue that makes this abstract API more easy for future or performance or MPI or exascale. Nothing. It's an abstract API that is abstract, and as Gilad said, it could also be abstracted on top of verbs, which is okay. But innovation is all around us, and looking at what this organization has done in the past, how many years? 10, 11? We've built amazing things. We have a really robust stack. It's highly deployed. It's highly efficient. I mean, it's beautifully architected in terms of the object model, in terms of the separation between like strict locking and management, while data path is extremely efficient. And when we look into the future, I mean, the pace of novelty is indeed increasing. We're seeing here new challenges all over. And of course, we need to address those in a timely manner. Now, there have been remarks both from the MPI community. I mean, these requirements are, I'd say most of them are known. Some of them are very recent. There's nothing that precludes us from extending our infrastructure in supporting the upcoming exascale systems very, very efficiently. And for this reason, we initiated the Open Fabrics Verbs working group with, I'd say, two purposes. Okay, so the first is, how do we make sure that, at the most intrinsic hardware level and the lowest level APIs of the stack, how can we make sure that these, the most demanding side of the applications requirements are dealt with? But in addition to that, there were comments today regarding, hey, you guys, you left clouds without any kind of, let's say, reaction or at least a community effort. Virtualization and maybe connection management and scalable SA. I mean, there are a lot of requirements that people put up. But as an organization, we saw that these yearly meetings are just not frequent enough to organize and try to consolidate and plan, let's say, community efforts to address these issues. or even prioritize them. So the second goal of the Open Fabrics Verbs Working Group is to provide a platform especially for this. So what we want to do, we want to have weekly meetings that basically raise awareness of the most urgent needs as a place to solicit collaboration between the companies to address these high priority items. As forum to discuss, even at a high level, the approaches of attacking these new kinds of problems. And in that way, basically achieve the OFA goal, which, I mean, I hear what the MPI folks said. We probably haven't done, a great job in doing this. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we didn't have this kind of mechanism or platform in place. Now, this is a community effort, and this is basically, this is a community organization. And the only way to say, let's develop stuff is by people in this community contributing and developing stuff together. So it's, on one hand, I mean, we can hear, let's say, some market requirements that says, we requested Open Fabrics to do this 2 years ago, and you didn't. The question is, who's you? Okay, so you is going to be whatever companies are interested in, or first of all, acknowledge that these are indeed important and of high importance and urgent, and then use this platform to coordinate the efforts with all the yous here. So I mean, basically, you is the people here. So this is basically what Open Fabrics Verbs is all about. I don't see this as something that's even scarcely related to legacy or stuff. I mean, we're looking into the future here. We're about how do we try to fix this perception, at least in some communities, that Open Fabrics hasn't been responsive enough, and now take the initiation and actively push the most urgent items that our user communities are worried about.
Thank you.
By the way, question?
Any questions?
If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes, please.
I'm hearing in the background here, and I don't intend to be in a negative way. It sounds like you're expressing failure of the OFA tax.
I think that's too harsh. I'd say, I mean, there are a lot of requirements all over. And I know that there are some issues that people probably have been burnt. I mean, I can just take the single example of, sorry, the Cisco MTU example. I mean, yeah, this is a point failure. I did say OFA as a whole. I mean, we've been doing great things, but this is something that, with a little bit of concentrate, could have been solved easly. So I don't think that means, hey, we as an organization are doing. We're probably doing something very good.
But what you're doing with the verbs is the next one path. I'm all in favor. But I can't help but ask, what's the overlap with the TAC, and how does the TAC fit into this?
Okay, so I think that probably TAC is, let's say that the time scale that the TAC needs to look forward to is probably between a year to 2 years to 3 years from now, identify technology trends, and guide working groups of OFA to address these emerging trends. While the Open Fabrics Working Group, and Verve Working Group, is more day-to-day incremental thing. That, for example, let's say that you have a new technology or a new area that you want to attack, you want to solve. And I can give one of the subjects that we're showing tomorrow, for example, container support. I mean, container is a huge buzz in the industry, and everybody's talking about it. And we're also going to talk about it tomorrow. But just saying that we want to, for example, support container, I'm just saying this is an example. Doesn't tell me how I'm going to support it, whether it's a good approach, whether people here see problems with this approach. So my only option is in this yearly conference to present these new kinds of ideas. And if people say, hey, we've worked on something in parallel, which actually happened to us with another company, and it's not quite this, then it's too late. For two reasons. First of all, I don't even know which people or which other companies are working on the same issues. And the second is that I would like to have feedback and feedback much earlier than when I actually write code and submit RFCs. I mean, we can use this working group. For example, we're going to dedicate the next 3, 4, 5 weeks to discuss container support. So we'll prevent and we'll go into the niches and we'll provide, and when we kind of agree and everybody looks like this is the thing, then the patches would follow like in a month or two when people actually submit patches. So I think if you look at the difference between the TAC and this working group, again, it's probably the time frame.
Thank you.
I think by the way, one thing more to do more is communicated because one of the reasons was the discussion is so there is a very nice connection.
Yeah, just a final remark. I mean, I think that these two working groups are going to work very, very closely. I think that for any abstract notion that's probably been found useful for in OFI, we can probably see that we can provide proper support as a verbs provider. So that's one point of interaction. Yeah, so as people said, I mean, these are not in conflicting goals. Yes, please.
Are you going to make source code to do this?
Pardon?
Are you going to make a source code for to do this?
No. There already is a source, an open source for it. It's called libIBverbs, libRDMACM, ACM, whatever is out there. And I mean, first of all, we already have a lot of source code out there, but I don't think that we won't add new stuff in the future. I mean, one of the things that OFA, I think, hasn't done, and I think talking about new stuff that we haven't done or we want to do, is start making RDMA more accessible to application writers. I think if you look at, I mean, of course, there's this very, very high-end requirements, like for the MPI and SHMEM for exascale, that's a one end. But still programming to verbs is very hard, and OFI, for example, is not going to make that any easier. It's more or less verbs with renaming. What we're really missing is actual ULPs or application-facing middleware that does make RDMA more accessible. So you're asking if we need new open source? Absolutely. We need an RDMA RPC library. We need an efficient socket implementation over RDMA, both kernel and user, maybe SMCR based, maybe something based on RSockets, I don't know. Maybe active messages, maybe publish subscribe, maybe logging facilities. I mean, I can think of any number of ULPs and interesting middleware that we can write over verbs and have them under the OFA umbrella, developed in open source, and then distributed to the various Linux distributions that will really make RDMA accessible. And this is something that we're hardly doing.
Do you think middleware is part of the mandate of the WWD?
I don't preclude anything. I think that what we want to do is prepare the OFA stack for future applications. I mean, that's probably a pretty broad goal. I think the most important goals are the one listed there, but I think that we can easily extend that to make it more accessible. Pardon?
Where there are gaps, right? So I mean, some middle where like NPL is well supported, but there are other places where
Yeah, and most of the places, it's not performance gaps. It's semantic and programmability gaps. That's, I mean, why not pull in ESX sockets into OFA? I don't know. We can think about, I mean, again, this is going to depend on whether people have the time to do it, but we can discuss what things we want to do to make RDMA more accessible.
I just wanted to add, start discussing the application features. They also in the platform to discuss all the well-known problems. Like on the last call, we talked a lot about versioning. Because that's what before repeaters work in all platforms and start with all platforms. And as for me as the developer and the works, it's painful. Like what they do, they provide people and there's no platform, and since now we have a platform to talk about versioning, and for example, even all features, let's say, we have, let's say, the work, but it's not particular well with talk about this more system where maybe we have to see how specific.
Yeah, or standardized error codes.
Oh, error codes.
I mean, this is an excellent topic. I mean, it's so easy to achieve. I mean, we need maybe 2 or 3 meetings to just agree upon the error codes, and then add some capability bits into, query, IBV query device to say, I support standard error codes. And once you query that capability, you know exactly what error code you're going to get for every operation. I mean, even as a vendor, to implement that, I mean, it's like that. I mean, and we haven't done it. So it's these kinds of things that we want to do here.
You need to move on.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Bill, as fast as you can.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just going to give you a couple of updates. One of the focuses that we had mentioned this session and what we've been doing over the past year and a half is an outreach to users. We have now a special place within our website that is for the users. There's a wiki that is being grown. So Susan and Florin specifically has put a lot of work into this wiki. If you have users, you have anybody who's interested, want to know more about some fundamentals of how to administer a fabric, point them to this page, specifically the wiki. Also the list. The email list is a great forum for posting questions and having experts respond to those kinds of questions. We're going to follow up the user group that's on Thursday and Friday, have them get more educated on this and bolster the communication. One of the things that we are working on, we will continue to work on more strongly after the conference is done, is refreshing the website. This is a preview of what it's going to look like. We're going to simplify the message, but use it as a stepping stone to 4 different audiences. You can see the 4 links up top. Anybody who wants to know about the organization, they've got a portal that'll tell them everything about who we are, what we do, and how to join. There's a portal for people who are interested in the Open Fabric software, all the downloads, all of the direct links for anybody who's interested in Open Fabric software. The user community will lead them to that page that I just showed you. And then a portal for all of the working groups, a list of who we are, what we do, and if you belong to any of those working groups, you have direct link to your information in that working group. So preview, as I said, of things to come. Hopefully going to roll this out in the next few months once we get all the content refreshed. Any questions? Any volunteers to help? Okay, thanks.
We always close with the request for a report card. I'm almost too tired to listen to what you have to say. But I do care. I'm having a little fun at your expense. Certainly, you've given us a lot of useful feedback on the working groups. Thank you for that. I guess in general, this is areas that I could think of where feedback from you would be helpful. If anything is a burning thought with you, please do take a minute to share it with us. We'll note this down and try to develop some kind of action around it. I'm really more interested in criticism than praise. I think silence means you're as tired as I am. But
Did we have any thought about next year? Workshop? What we're gonna do?
with respect to what?
Next year, workshop?
No, not really. Do you mean in terms of content, timing?
In terms of location?
Unless we hear otherwise, we assume we're going to come back again, but if there's a feeling this isn't appropriate for whatever reason, that'd be a good thing to make us aware of. We typically find out what times they have available and choose one that works more or less in our window.
This week was particularly bad because there's also GPC and open power. And someone said this week.
Okay.
So it was a collision with big one, pretty much covered the same thing.
Okay. I didn't know. Thanks for telling me. We do make an effort to schedule around any known conflicts. The problem is we have to commit so early to this time. We oftentimes don't know the exact timing of any competing events because they haven't yet committed to their schedule. But obviously, in general, we try our very best to avoid that. Okay. Well, if that's it, thank you all very much for attending. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, and we'll start up bright and early tomorrow morning.